So, thank you to everybody who commented on the Scrolling Tongs video saying that I should do a series on making these tongs. And as I said before, I thought that I was gonna do some videos on them anyway. So today I'm going to be starting off this series with making a pair of bolt jaw tongs. These three pairs of bolt jaw tongs are ones that I've made previously throughout my life as a blacksmith, and so I want to talk about these three pairs and where I went wrong in making them. So this pair is the oldest that I made, or have made, of bolt jaw tongs, and I made it to hold 6mm round bar. And you can see straight away that one of the faults that I made on them is these arms are way too long. I think I took like maybe 8 inches of material for these arms, which is just way too much. Really, you want to be taking about 3.5 inches of material from the bolster, from the boss to the jaws. The reins are pretty good on this pair. I'm pretty happy with them. It's just the jaws are way too big and very sort of unwieldy and hard to hold and keep sort of in a nice position. So moving on to this pair, this is a very different style to this. As you can see, we don't have a boss. We just have a straight bit of steel with a hole through. And that is the fault of this pair of tongs. I really do not like how the reins form when we have just 2 straight bars on top of each other without a boss. They're very, you can see there how they sort of, you have to twist them quite a lot, and they're really awkward in the hand, I find, unless you're holding them right at the end. If you're holding them there, they want to twist. The jaws on this one are much better, and you can see that we've got a nice flat where we need the flat and thin there. So when I'm saying where we need the flat, we want it here so that we have the strength in the jaw as we're closing them. So you can see we're going to have strength here. It's not going to bend in this direction, it'll bend in this direction, which isn't too bad. If it does, as we can just knock it back into square. So this pair, you can see we have that V groove, which means that we can hold both square and round, which is a much better way to do the jaw than just a round. As the tong, then you can hold 2 pieces of bar in it rather than just one. Moving on to the final pair of bolt jaw tongs, you can see we have this pair, which again is a very different style to the other two. We just have a straight bar which then gets bent to form the boss area rather than actually forging a boss out. I find that this one is a pretty good design. I think this is exactly the same in terms of performance as this pair with an actual boss. This one, again, I don't really like, as the reins are just sort of crossing over and it wants to twist, whereas this pair, we can actually bring the reins in. I think it is, again, because we have a bit of a longer length on the reins, so they come in parallel further, so they come in parallel for more of the reins. The jaws, again, a nice V-bit jaws so that we can hold both square and round. I think that's pretty much it for these pairs of tongs. This pair was the first ever pair that I forged out, and really the jaws are just way too long on it, and we only have a round hole in the jaws so that we can only hold round bar. This pair, I don't like the fact that it doesn't have a boss and it always wants to twist on you when you're holding it. The jaws, on the other hand, are pretty good. You know, I'm pretty happy with the jaws, and we've got a nice V-bit in the end so we can hold both square and round. And then this final pair, again, pretty happy with them. They work reasonably well. Maybe the jaws are a little bit too long. The boss area, I'm not a big fan of it, but I don't mind it. It still serves a purpose and is better than this one. So there we go. I think that's it. Let's now get to making the new pair of bolt jaw tongs. I've forged one half of the tongs out already. You can see it's basically just your typical pair of bolt jaw tongs. It's going to be a small pair. I only want this for about 8mm. I've done it to fit 8mm square bar, which will then also fit 8mm round bar. To make the other half of the tong, which is what I'm going to show you, I've got this piece of steel, which is 20mm by 10mm by 340mm. So let's get this in the fire, heat it up, and give it a hit with a hammer. The first step is to forge out the jaws of the tong. And so what I'm going to do is come over the far edge, isolate off sort of an inch of material or a cube of material, then come over the near edge, and you can see I've got a line on the anvil here, so we can then make another little step down, which will be the front of the boss. Then we're going to draw out the material in between those two little isolations or steps to 3.5 inches, and so that'll be sort of the material which we then bend into the U shape, leaving that sort of mass on the end, which we can then forge out into an area where we can grip some bar. I've come over to the smaller anvil so I can fit this block in the hardy hole, so we can use this to draw that material out in between those two isolations without running the risk of damaging those isolations on the face of the anvil. We have the section of material in between our two step-ins or isolations drawn out to 3.5 inches. What I want to do now is come over the far edge and knock down at the second isolation, which we can then upset into a nice square corner, forming the front of our boss. And I don't want to go all the way to 90 straight from the off, as what we can do is form folds in the back here, which can then cause cold shuts and a crack, and then this jaw will break off. So we want to go to about 80 degrees. And then we can, on the next heat, upset the material down there, forming a nice square shoulder. This is the one that I've made earlier. So what we've got to do now is isolate off the section for the boss. So we'll be coming over the far edge, half on, half off, knock that material down, creating a step, and then draw out the first section of the reins, which you can see the first section is a nice rectangular bar with the corners knocked off. Is that, you know, you're never really going to hold a tong there, you're going to be holding it further back. So as it tapers back along the handle, we then come into a nice oval. So the sides are rounded, which is just a bit easier in the hand, so you're not going to get any nasty blisters or cuts or anything. You'd smoosh that material in a little bit more over the far edge, so we have a bit of a sort of shorter boss, but hopefully a little bit of a wider boss. And it'll clean up that square edge that we forged on the far side there. So the next step is to clean up this section of the reins and then draw out the rest of this material, and I'm going to do it with a sledgehammer. You can weld reins on, but I find that if you weld a rein on, that's just an area that can potentially break as there is going to be a weld in there. It may save you a little bit of time, but to be honest, once you've prepped the bar, put a scarf on this bar and then the other bar that you're going to weld on, and then actually weld it on, and then draw another little taper down on the rein that you weld onto it, it all flows into this section of the tong. Probably it's just going to be the same amount of work as it would be if you just drew the reins out of this solid bar. So let's have some fun with a sledgehammer. I'll now finish this off with a hand hammer, get the sides down to an octagon, then round, then knock these sides off to form a nice oval. I'll just finish off drawing down this material so we can connect our two tapers. We can now go back and begin working on the jaws of the tong. I've got a nice localized heat on the end of the bar, so I can bend this lump of material back out. So then when we put a bend in there, it's going to sit parallel to this side of the reins. You can see the material on the end of the tong here is actually set back from the boss over here. So what I mean by that is if we had this material in line with this side of the boss, we wouldn't actually be able to get any bar into the tongs as they would be overlapping when we put the other pair on. This bottom side of the jaw here wants to be in line with just past the middle of the boss, so that we have that space to get the bar in there once we've riveted them together. It's time to work on the jaws, and what I'm going to do is split this piece of material. So I've got a nice sharp chisel which I can use just to run along this edge, making sure to be in the middle as best I can. And I want to go just about to the bottom of where our isolation, where that step down ends. If that makes sense. Because this tong is only for 8mm round bar, we don't actually need the cut to be that deep, as we don't need too much material there to spread to actually hold around the sides of the bar. I've quickly forged out this bar, which I knocked down from 10mm round to a square bar. And so this is what I'm going to use to do the final prepping on the end of the jaw, so that we can fit square bar that is roughly this size, which is it's about 10 mil, but it's a bit under, because from the 10 mil round you do lose some of the width on it as you go to square. But that means that we can very easily fit 8 mil round bar in the jaws. So I'm going to come on the step again and forge this down into that little cut that we've made, widening it, opening it out, and making sure that it is going to be a perfect fit when we put a piece of bar, square bar this size, into it, which also means we can fit round bar, 8 mil round bar in it. You'll notice I've also taken this top corner off, so that when we are here and we're forging on this top edge with a hammer, we don't ding our hammer face too much. You can do this in the vise if you want to, but I don't think it really makes a difference. And there we go, we've got a nice V-bit in the end of our tongs. We've got our two halves of our tongs. The last thing that I want to do before we put them together, obviously I'm going to drill the holes, and I'm going to drill them rather than punching, as they're both cold now anyway, but also drilling them, you are going to get a bit of a cleaner hole, and you don't get any swelling on the boss, which it might be, you know, an aesthetic thing that you don't really want there to be, the swelling on the boss. But anyway, the last thing to do before we do any of that is to put a slight bend in the reins about here in this section of the reins. So you'll see on this pair of scrolling tongs that the reins aren't straight with the jaws. If the reins were straight with the jaws, they'd be coming out here somewhere. You can see here we have a little bit of a bend, so the jaw is just knocked this way slightly, which means the reins then end up parallel and not sticking out at these really weird angles. So I'm going to do it cold, as there's no point to really have any heat on this. I'm going to put about 3 inches out the vise, then just a pair of tuning forks or bending forks, get in just behind the boss and put a tiny bend in there. It really doesn't take very much. Got to do the exact same to this one, or the exact same as best you can. Okay, we'll dot some centre marks and then drill the holes, then we can get on to riveting. I've drilled an 8mm hole in our halves of our tongs, and then I've run just a countersink on both sides to deburr it. So we've got a bit of a chamfer on the edges, and it means that they're going to run a bit smoother. You know, it's a good idea to deburr your drilled holes, or even if you're punching them, maybe still just run a drill bit, a bigger drill bit or countersink in there to take the corners off so they run a bit smoother. I've got a little section of 8mm round bar heating up in the fire, which is what I'm going to use as a rivet. You can, of course, buy rivets, but I don't really see the point, as a rivet just makes itself as you're forging on it. You just got to be a little bit careful to section off your material, so you've got half of it on this side and half on the other side, so you get even rivet heads forming. If you are going to use a bit of mild steel rod like I'm doing, just make sure to do it hot, as if you do it cold, it can work harden as you're hitting it, and therefore it's going to crack, which is never a good idea, or never an aesthetic thing in a rivet, and also can be a bit dangerous if that crack then, you know, a bit flies off during use. See there, I'm actually just hitting over the boss, pushing it down so that we get some material coming through. So we now have enough material on both sides for the rivet. I'm going to have to take a new heat now. So we can use the ball peen to add a bit of a round or dome to the rivet head. I'll just knock the jaws in a bit. Trying to keep them even. Now I've got this piece of bar, which was what we used to actually create the V-bit. I've just cut it off that bar. So we'll put that into the jaws. And tap them closed. So I'm really happy with how this pair of tongs has turned out. For somebody who doesn't really make a lot of tongs, I'm just a general blacksmith who likes to tinker around and make arty things, animal heads and scrolls and things like that. Never really tools or hammers. So to actually make this pair of bolt jaw tongs and for them to turn out as they did, I'm really happy with it. So stick around if you want to see some more tong making videos. I'm going to be doing a couple of other sets. I think at the moment I'm planning ahead and I'm going to be doing a pair of wolf jaw tongs, a pair of box jaw tongs, and then maybe just a flat bit pair of tongs as well. So I hope you like this video, and if you do, please stick around and there may be some more tong videos on the way.